All right, so are you ready to dive into something pretty intense today?
Always up for a challenge.
Okay, good, because we're tackling the lives of migrant workers in Canada, and
Yeah.
it's a topic that's really heating up right now. You send over that speech from MP Jenny Kwan,
Right?
along with some comments from labor advocates, and well, it's pretty clear that Canada's temporary foreign workers program is,
Oh, it's under some serious scrutiny, yeah.
yeah, it's,
Yeah, and rightfully so.
yeah, for good reason. The report that's kind of at the center of this whole discussion doesn't pull any punches.
No, it doesn't.
Some are even going as far as calling the TFWP modern-day slavery. I mean,
Yeah,
that's a
that's a
pretty
strong statement.
strong statement.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to think about it in the context of the fact that there are actually more temporary foreign workers in Canada than permanent residents.
Right?
I mean, that just seems like a recipe for a huge power imbalance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It's like setting the stage for exploitation right from the start. This inherent power imbalance is built into the system.
Yeah. And that's where this whole thing about closed work permits comes in, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's the core of the issue.
So explain that to me. Like, what does that mean in real world terms?
So imagine you're coming to this new country hoping to build a better life, but you're completely dependent on just one person for your job, your visa, basically your whole ability to stay in the country.
Oh, wow.
That's the situation so many migrant workers find themselves in under this program.
So if your boss turns out to be, abusive or taking advantage of you,
Yeah.
you're basically stuck.
You're trapped. Leaving that job could mean getting deported.
Oh, wow. It's scary to think about.
It's a terrifying reality.
Yeah.
And this vulnerability is what makes these workers so susceptible to exploitation.
Right.
And we're not just talking about hypotheticals here.
Yeah.
Derek Johnstone from the UFCW, he shared a story about a migrant worker who ended up trapped in a human trafficking ring.
Wait, human trafficking?
Yeah.
Here in Canada?
Right here in Canada. it
Here.
happened.
Oh.
It's a dark reality.
Hmm.
It's a reminder that these systems can be manipulated for such horrific purposes.
Yeah. And, this worker, this guy who John Stone talked about,
Mm-hmm.
he had his passport taken away. He was forced to live in these really cramped and awful conditions
Right.
and was paid next to nothing.
Barely anything.
Yeah.
And on top of that, he faced threats and violence.
Wow.
So basically a modern form of captivity.
It's just heartbreaking. You think in a country like Canada, there would be ways to prevent this kind of thing.
Well, that's where the whole issue of government oversight comes in.
Yeah.
And this is where things get even more concerning.
Okay.
According to Jenny Kwan in her speech, 93% of government workplace inspections are either virtual or they're prearranged.
Wait, hold on. Virtual inspections.
Yeah.
How can you possibly assess a worker's safety and well-being over a computer screen?
Right. It's hard to imagine how that would be effective.
And prearranged visits. That's
Yep.
basically giving the employer a heads up to hide anything shady they're doing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It completely defeats the purpose of an inspection.
Yeah. It makes you wonder how committed the government really is to protecting these vulnerable workers.
Yeah, and to add to that, only 7% of inspections are unannounced.
Wow. So the vast majority of workplaces never see a truly independent investigation.
That's right. The system seems set up to fail these workers.
It's really upsetting. And it makes the whole vulnerable worker program seem even more ironic.
Yeah,
It's meant to be a safety net for people who've been exploited, but it feels like it's falling short.
yeah, it's failing in a big way.
Yeah.
Jenny Kwan actually pointed out that 42% of applicants to this program are rejected.
Wow. That many.
Yeah, and
It's a huge number.
the reason they're rejected is often because they can't provide enough proof of their abuse.
So they're penalized for not documenting their own exploitation.
Exactly. It's a catch-22 situation.
Yeah. Wouldn't documenting their abuse put them at even greater risk of retaliation from their employers?
Of course.
Eh,
It's a terrible position to be in.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
very system that's supposed to protect them is creating barriers.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking and frustrating.
Yeah, and it's no wonder that so many people are pushing for open work permits as a solution.
Right. Open work permits are being seen as a crucial step towards fixing this broken system.
Yeah, this seems to be a recurring theme in everything you sent over.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Can you explain why open work permits are seen as such a game changer?
Well, open work permits would essentially level the playing field.
Okay.
They would give migrant workers the same freedom to choose their employer that most Canadians have.
Right.
They wouldn't be tied to one specific employer,
I see.
and they wouldn't be living with that constant fear of deportation if they left a bad job.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean,
Wow.
think about when you're looking for a job.
Hmm.
You have the power to compare different jobs, negotiate your salary. You can walk away from any opportunity that doesn't feel right.
Right. You have options.
Yeah.
You have
But
control.
migrant workers under the TFWP, they're denied that basic, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they're immediately put at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
It's a huge power imbalance.
It is. And it seems like open work permits would empower workers,
Absolutely.
create a more competitive job market, and maybe even lead to better wages and working conditions for everybody.
Yeah, it's not just about migrant workers.
Yeah.
It could potentially benefit everyone.
Yeah. But there's another piece of this whole puzzle that's been really bothering me. It's this whole blame game around migrant workers and the housing crisis.
Oh yeah, that's a dangerous narrative.
Yeah. Jenny Kwan brought this up in her speech.
Yeah, she did.
This idea that migrant workers are somehow to blame for Canada's housing affordability problems. It's
Well,
just ridiculous to say that these vulnerable workers who are often living in overcrowded and inadequate housing themselves are causing this crisis.
yeah, it's ludicrous.
It's like they're being scapegoated for a problem that's been building for decades.
It's a convenient way to deflect attention from the real issues. The lack of affordable housing, the speculation in the real estate market, the failure to invest in long-term solutions.
Yeah, it's so much easier to point the finger at a marginalized group than to actually tackle the systemic issues.
Exactly. And it's dangerous because it fuels xenophobia and further marginalizes an already vulnerable population.
Yeah,
It's a divisive tactic.
it is. So what's the answer then? How do we create a system that's actually fair and just for migrant workers? You know, one thing that really stood out to me in everything you sent was this idea of a pathway to permanent residency.
Right. A lot of advocates see that as the key to creating a more equitable system.
Yeah, because if these workers are contributing to our economy building lives here, raising families,
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't they have a chance to really put down roots and become permanent members of Canadian society?
Absolutely. It's about recognizing their value and their contributions.
Yeah. But I imagine there are a lot of complexities involved in making that happen.
Oh, for sure. There are definitely a lot of things to consider.
Okay. Well, let's take a break to digest all of this, and then when we come back, we can dive into those complexities.
Sounds good.
All right, stay with us. So we've been talking about this temporary foreign workers program, and
It's a lot to take in.
yeah, it really is. And honestly, it's pretty disheartening to see how deep these problems run.
Yeah, it'd be tough to hear about.
But I think it's important to remember that knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
You know, understanding these issues is the first step towards actually making a difference.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what we're seeing here is that this isn't just about, a few bad apples or some isolated incidents.
Right.
It's about the structure of the program itself. The closed work permits the lack of oversight.
Right.
They create this environment where abuse can thrive.
It's like the system is rigged against these workers from the get-go. You know, you mentioned earlier that some people are comparing the TFWP to modern-day slavery.
Hmm.
It's a strong statement, but the more we learn about how this program works, the more I understand why people are making that connection.
Yeah, I mean, it's a powerful analogy,
Mm,
and it's not entirely inaccurate.
right. When you think about it, tying a worker's immigration status to just one employer,
Hmm.
it creates this level of dependency that can be really dangerous.
Absolutely. It takes
Yeah.
away their basic rights and freedoms.
Yeah, and it puts them at the mercy of their employers.
Exactly.
And then you add in the lack of real oversight and enforcement. I mean, remember those virtual inspections we talked about?
Yeah.
It just blows my mind. It's like the government is deliberately turning a blind eye to what's happening.
Yeah. It raises serious questions about their commitment to protecting these workers.
It does, and it really highlights why so many people are pushing for open work permits.
Mm.
So can we break that down a bit more? Like, what would that shift actually look like in practice?
So with open work permits, migrant workers would have the freedom to choose their employer, just like anyone else in Canada.
Right.
They could look at different job opportunities, try to negotiate better wages and conditions, and if they're in a bad situation, they could leave without worrying about being deported.
Yeah, that seems so much fairer. I mean, it's about giving them the same choices and opportunities that we have.
Exactly. It's about leveling the playing field.
Yeah. Why hasn't this been done already? It seems like such a common sense solution.
Well, there's definitely been pushback, mostly from some employer groups.
Okay, what are they saying?
Their argument is that open work permits would lead to labor shortages
Okay.
and that it would destabilize the market.
But isn't it the current system that's unstable,
Yeah, that's a good point.
the one that relies on a workforce that's vulnerable and easily exploited.
Right.
I mean, shouldn't a system that protects workers' rights and promotes fair labor practices be the foundation of a strong economy?
Absolutely. And I think this gets to a bigger ethical question that we need to ask ourselves.
Okay.
Are we willing to sacrifice people's well-being just for cheap labor and economic efficiency?
That's a tough question. And it's even more disturbing when you consider how migrant workers are being scapegoated for all kinds of problems.
Right.
We talked about the housing crisis earlier
Uh,
and how these workers are being blamed for an issue that's been decades in the making.
It's a classic diversion tactic.
Yeah, it's shifting the blame away from failed policies and onto a group that doesn't have a lot of power.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Jenny Kwan really called this out in her speech.
she did.
She pointed out how ridiculous it is to blame migrant workers for something that's rooted in years of bad housing policy.
Yeah, it's like saying we messed up, so let's blame the newcomers.
Exactly.
It's divisive and dangerous.
It is, and it prevents us from addressing the real issues.
So how do we change this? How do we get past the blame game and
Yeah.
create a system that's truly fair?
Well, I think it starts with seeing migrant workers not as a problem, but as valuable members of our society.
Yeah, they deserve the same rights and protections as anyone else.
Exactly.
And that brings us back to the idea of a pathway to permanent residency. Can we explore that a little deeper? What are the benefits and challenges of that kind of pathway?
Yeah, that's definitely worth digging into.
It's been heavy talking about all this exploitation and scapegoating
Yeah.
and a system that just doesn't seem to be working.
It can be disheartening.
Oh,
But I have to say, I am feeling a little bit of hope
oh, good.
because in the middle of all these problems, there are people pushing for change.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a growing movement for sure.
And, one of the solutions that seems to have the most potential that we keep coming back to is this pathway to permanent residency.
Yeah, that seems to be a common thread in a lot of the discussions.
It does.
Yeah.
And it seems like it could really address so many of these underlying issues.
I think so too. I mean, granting permanent residency would really be a way of acknowledging how much migrant workers contribute.
Mhm.
It's like saying, we see you, we value your work, and we want you to be a part of our society.
It makes so much sense.
Mm.
If someone is working here, building a life here,
Mhm. Why shouldn't they have the chance to become a permanent resident?
it's about basic fairness and dignity
Right.
and recognizing that everyone deserves a chance to thrive.
And wouldn't it benefit Canada too?
Oh, absolutely.
If we gave these workers more stability and security, wouldn't that allow them to contribute even more?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, they could really put down roots, invest in their futures.
Yeah. But I'm sure there are people who would push back against this idea.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Any big change is going to face some resistance.
So what are some of the arguments against it?
Well, some people might worry about the impact on social services,
Okay.
or they might say that it would lead to more competition for jobs.
Yeah, but wouldn't the economic benefits of having a more stable workforce outweigh those costs?
That's the big question. And there's a lot of research that shows that immigrants actually boost the economy.
Oh, interesting.
They bring new skills, they start businesses, they create jobs.
And they pay taxes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're net benefit.
And let's not forget about the cultural richness that immigrants bring to our society.
That's so important.
Yeah.
Canada has always been a country built on immigration.
It's part of our identity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So embracing a pathway to permanent residency for migrant workers isn't just the right thing to do ethically.
Mm-hmm.
It's also the smart thing to do for our economy and our society as a whole.
So if someone's listening to this and they want to help create a more just system for migrant workers, what can they do?
I think the first step is awareness. Talk to your friends and family about these issues.
Yeah.
Share the stories. You've heard the statistics, the human impact of these policies.
People talking.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
support organizations that are fighting for migrant workers' rights.
Yeah.
And contact your elected officials. Let them know that this is an issue that matters to you.
It's about using our voices to demand better.
Exactly. We can all play a part in creating a Canada that's truly inclusive and welcoming.
Well said. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of migrant workers in Canada. It's been a tough conversation
It has.
and an important one.
Definitely. It's time to shine a light on these injustices.
Yeah, and to start demanding better for everyone who calls Canada home.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening and for joining us on this journey.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And we hope you'll keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for change.
Couldn't have said it better myself.